I'm actually nauseated by this. This is vile. This is hideous stuff. This is a damning indictment of the people who run this country. I'm discussing two politicians here today with no moral core, no decency, no integrity, who use the most vulnerable people on earth as crude electoral fodder. Not just people who are deeply vulnerable, but actual victims of theirs. I'm talking about Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister whose approval rating is currently around, minus 42, slightly less popular than the bubonic plague, and Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, and one of the worst excuses for a frontline politician so far spewed out by Westminster, which is quite the accolade. Now, finally, the plight of the Palestinian people has been raised at Prime Minister's Question Time. That's a weekly gladiators contest where MPs scream a lot and make sounds like dying animals. And what both politicians did is show their racist contempt for Palestinians, specifically throwing Palestinians who are suffering because of the horrors they're complicit in under a bus. Get a sick bag ready and have a listen.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children, and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. The Home Secretary has already got her team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Now, this has made me angry, and it's made a lot of people angry. That is, people who have a soul, and it exposes how politically and morally bankrupt our rulers really are. Now, look, I supported the Ukrainian family resettlement scheme. My brother took in a Ukrainian family under that scheme. So did some of my friends, and I'm very proud of them. The point was made by some is that when Russia illegally and brutally invaded Ukraine, the solidarity and sympathy that was rightly extended to Ukrainian refugees was not, and let's put this gently, exactly extended to non-Europeans with a different skin pigmentation. Now, listen to this example from At the Time on the BBC. Listen to what Ukraine's deputy chief prosecutor said, or former deputy chief prosecutor, and listen to the sympathetic response what he said gets from the BBC presenter.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles and his helicopters and his rockets.
And so, of course, I understand and respect the emotion. What you are outlining there is this tension between longer-term efforts to apply pressure to Vladimir Putin, such as financial sanctions, and the very immediate military threat which you're experiencing.
Well, that sums up the mentality grimly, doesn't it? The difference here, of course, is that Britain did not supply the weapons to slaughter Ukrainians. Quite the opposite. Britain has actually offered Ukraine £7.8 billion worth of military aid. On the other hand, Britain supplies weapons to Israel to enable it to slaughter Palestinians and to destroy their homes and to make Gaza, in the words of President Donald Trump, not habitable. The Labour government might go, well, look, we suspended some weapons to Israel, didn't we? Well, they tend to keep this very quiet because they did so under legal compulsion and were very apologetic at the time, emphasising how Israel is a close ally and so on and so forth. Keir Starmer keeps calling Israel she and talking about her right to self-defence. Let's just park that. In any case, they only suspended 8% of arms sales. Crucially, Britain supplies the crucial components for F-35 jets, which rain death and destruction on Gaza. Furthermore, Kemi Badenoch, as Conservative government cabinet minister, and Keir Starmer, then as leader of the opposition, backed Israel's onslaught against Gaza, which turned almost every single person in Gaza men, women, children, babies into displaced people, leaving the vast majority of their homes either severely damaged or destroyed, and in any case, not habitable. That also involved Israel's deliberate siege of Gaza, which deprived its people of the means of life. And indeed, Keir Starmer, at the very beginning, defended Israel's rights to cut off power and water on LBC and institute a siege.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
What he supported here was illegal, and he never apologised for it, by the way. Instead, he just kept on trying to gaslight everyone by stating he never believed what he in fact actually said at the time. Now, at the same time, Israel's political and military leaders, of course, repeatedly made clear their belief in the collective guilt of the civilian population, who were called human animals, who the Israeli president declared were all involved in 7th of October. And Hamas, he said it's an entire nation out there responsible, underlining how every single person in Gaza had a target on their back. The entire population were at risk. That this is in fact a genocide facilitated by the British state. So these are two politicians who have played what I believe to be a criminal role in the destruction of Gaza and thus the creation of refugees. They should be in court. But having helped annihilate Gaza, they now declare their refusal to allow a family, just one family, of those whose lives they helped destroy come here for safety. And it's worth actually looking, by the way, at the facts of this case, which Sky News, to their credit, went through, which is to say that this is a family of 6. So you have a husband, a wife, their children, aged 18, 17, 8, and 7 years old. They lived in Gaza. Their homes, like most people, was destroyed by Israel's Western-supplied armed onslaught. Now, although I'm going to criticize here, actually, the word Sky used, because they said the homes were destroyed after the 7th of October attacks and subsequent conflict. That's ridiculous. The fate of the family is framed around 7th of October and then subsequent conflicts, an absurd euphemism for Israel's military onslaught, which was armed and backed by the West. By the way, in the same way they always say Hamas-run health ministry, why don't they say Western armed Israeli onslaught? Just make it clear who's actually supplying the arms for what's happened to Gaza. That would help in terms of just being factual and people holding to account their government's own decisions. Now, Sky News said they ended up living in a humanitarian zone and then a refugee camp. They go on. In January 2024, the family applied to come to the UK via the Ukraine Family Scheme form in a bid to join one of the parents' brothers, who is a British citizen and has lived in the UK since 2007. While they acknowledged they were not eligible for the Ukraine scheme, the family chose to apply in an attempt to use the Home Office's policy on applications for entry clearance outside the rules. The Home Office rejected the request, saying they were not satisfied there were compelling compassionate circumstances to justify a request outside the rules. They also noted the lack of a resettlement scheme for Palestinians. So what then happened, as Sky News go on to say, is the family launched an appeal on human rights grounds, despite the Home Office saying they had no grounds, but a judge then ruled the initial rejection constituted a rejection of their human rights. So it allowed an appeal, partly under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to a family life, in this case between the man living in Britain and his family in Gaza. That appeal was then rejected. Again, the lack of a Palestinian resettlement scheme noted as a reason. Subsequently, an appeal was launched at a higher tribunal, as Sky also go on to say, with one argument that the case should be considered on its own merits without allowing the lack of a Palestinian resettlement scheme to outweigh other arguments, as the judge said. So the judge heard the case and allowed the appeal and said it was wrong to have taken the absence of the resettlement scheme into account at all. He concluded that just because a scheme to resettle people didn't exist, it didn't mean they're banned from coming to the UK via humanitarian routes, and said the absence of a resettlement scheme is irrelevant to their decision. So the judge endorsed the family's claim based on the European Convention on Human Rights and the right to a family life between them and their relative in the UK. Now, Starmer says he would close what he called the loophole, but as Sky News says, it's not clear what this would entail. I mean, it's just grandstanding, which doesn't engage with the facts of what actually happened. Now, to be clear, almost all legal routes for refugees to come to Britain have been closed. They've been shut down. So what happens with Ukrainians is an exception was made, and also for Hong Kong. But for the vast majority of people on Earth, you cannot apply to become a refugee in Britain. And bear in mind, by the way, that there are, well over 100 million displaced people on Earth. Most are internally displaced. Of those who become refugees, that's what happens if you leave your country, the majority are in neighbouring countries. The vast majority of refugees are in poor countries. the number who come to Europe is a very small proportion of the overall globally displaced population, even though the West plays, let's put it gently, an outsized role in causing death and destruction, which causes people to flee their homes, e.g. Gaza. Now, to be clear, Palestinians overwhelmingly want to remain in their actual homeland. But given the British state is complicit in the annihilation of Gaza, it has an overwhelming moral responsibility to offer a home to some of those who wish to seek sanctuary. Instead, these utterly disgusting, wretched politicians use the suffering of this Palestinian family, one Palestinian family, in order to play to the basest prejudices of the electorate. And we should call it what it is. It is racism. Why would they make such a positive case for Ukrainians to be able to come here, but not Palestinians? What makes Palestinians different? It is shameless, naked racism. That's what it is. Anti-Palestinian racism, which is completely mainstream and respectable in this and other Western countries. You can almost say what you like about Palestinians with no consequences. Now, this comes at a time when the Labour government has decided to respond to the rise of Nigel Farage's Reform Party by kicking migrants and refugees even harder. They're spending £392 million on deporting undocumented migrants. That is enough to train more than 10,000 nurses. They're offering migrant-bashing porn, that is publishing footage of migrants being deported as though they're trash being thrown out, and issuing guidance which all but forbids refugees who've taken a dangerous route from ever getting British citizenship. That's pretty much all refugees. That violates the UN Refugee Convention. Again, the reason for that is the legal safe routes were shut down. That's what the British governments, successive British governments, have done. As I wrote in my Guardian column, this strategy to defuse the radical right has been used all over Europe. And all it did is shift conversation onto territory favourable to anti-migrant right-wing parties. It has boosted them everywhere. They thought it was so clever. We'll take their policies and their rhetoric and then they'll just disappear. The opposite happened, because what they could always do, these anti-migrant parties, is go, we've been vindicated. Look at us. Look at what now, see, we're legitimised. The conversations on our terrain rather than on terrain about, I don't know, taxing the rich to invest in things and actually solve people's problems. And we'll always be able to outbid them. We always look more authentic as well. That's why Austria, France, you name it, mainstream parties they did this strategy. It always had the same effect. And this is just a substitute for the government having actual answers to the problems faced by voters in this country. But I'm afraid you cannot eat xenophobia. Racism will not pay the bills or put food on the table. I just want to end by emphasising the utter duplicity, the unapologetic deceit of Keir Starmer, who is the biggest political con man of our age. During the Labour leadership campaign, he defended free movement. He also said this about immigration when he was looking for the support of Labour members to become leader.
I think Conservatives have created this hostile environment, whether it's Windrush, whether it's the general response to immigration, or whether it's just the way the Home Office make their decisions. It's based on this idea that somebody's trying to cheat rather than actually based on an open, welcoming environment. I think we should welcome people wherever they come from, thank them for their contribution, and see them as part of our families, our communities, and our society. And embrace that. I mean, London is an amazingly diverse and fantastic place for it. And the whole United Kingdom is better because of immigration. And I think, if I'm honest, the Labour Party has been a bit scared of making the positive case for immigration for quite a number of years. And I think we need to turn that round and broaden it out and make sure that people feel absolutely welcome here.
Now, Keir Starmer reneged on absolutely everything pretty much he stood for in that election. Taxing the rich, to public ownership, to scrapping tuition fees, to putting human rights at the heart of British foreign policy. Keir Starmer is a charlatan. He's a man with no principles, no moral core, who stands for nothing other than advancing his own career. That guy wanted to be Prime Minister for the hell of it. And he will throw anyone under a bus in the pursuit of power, including a family of Palestinian refugees whose lives he has helped destroy. Shame on that man. Shame on his government. And I've no doubt that Keir Starmer's eventual downfall from power will be a very, very bitter experience for him. Please like and subscribe with your thoughts and your comments about the disgusting politicians which run this country. Help us as we're expanding our operations across TikTok, X, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Patreon.com/OwenJones84. I hope you can see the amazing impact that the brilliant, talented person I've hired, thanks to you, has made. Share the video, get the message out. I'll speak to you in a bit.